A new Wordle puzzle is online. Click on the link to play.
Listening to the following video may give you clues. Please like and share the videos.
A judge upholds Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking conviction. In a recent decision, a judge again upheld the sex trafficking conviction of a Connecticut woman.
Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of trafficking girls and carrying out criminal sexual activity with a minor. She was initially convicted of both charges and has now received 2 life sentences.
A judge denied a petition by her defense attorneys to suppress evidence, but in the end, upheld the charges against her. Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking conviction upheld.
A judge on Monday affirmed the sex trafficking conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell. During a month-long trial, 4 women testified that Maxwell arranged for Epstein to molest them when they were as young as 14 years old.
One of the victims, who was 15 at the time, was unable to get on a commercial flight, so Maxwell arranged for Epstein to take her. A British socialite was recently found guilty of assisting a financier named Jeffrey Epstein in the sex trafficking of teenage girls.
In her defense, Ghislaine Maxwell tried to get her conviction overturned, but a judge refused. Judge Allison Nathan said that one of her jurors had failed to disclose the sexual abuse.
The judge cited several other inconsistencies in the case. The judge, who did not name the victim, did not rule out a reduction in sentence.
In her order, Nathan concluded that 2 of the conspiracy counts were duplicates of the 3rd. The sentence is not set to be determined until June.
The case focuses on whether Maxwell will be sentenced to prison for several years or decades. While there are no specific details about Maxwell's sentencing, it is important to note that a sentence of more than 55 years is not uncommon.
While the prosecutors and defense team argued that the jury failed to impose the maximum sentence for a woman who allegedly violated children, but the judge found that there was no evidence of a racial bias in the trial.
The judge also found that Juror 50 was not completely honest when answering the question, "Have you ever been abused?" A U.S.
District judge rejected an appeal by Ghislaine Maxwell, who was convicted of sex trafficking and other charges in December. The judge found that the jury's findings were supported by evidence, and he refused to grant a new trial.
Ghislaine Maxwell faces several years to decades in prison if convicted of sex trafficking. Sex trafficking and transporting a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity counts upheld by judge.
A British socialite, former girlfriend of disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein, was found guilty on 5 of 6 sex trafficking and abuse charges. Although Maxwell initially pleaded not guilty to the charges, the judge upheld her conviction on 5 of the 6 counts.
The charges include conspiracy to entice a minor to travel to another state, sex trafficking, and transporting a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. The convictions come with a maximum sentence of 40 years in prison.
The conviction of Miss Maxwell is likely to land her in prison for decades.
The conspiracy to commit sex trafficking of minors carries a maximum sentence of 40 years, while the other counts carry 5 to 10 years. The sentence for each charge depends on whether the other counts are proved.
The judge also upheld the charges of perjury. The prosecutors presented their case over 2 weeks, beginning Nov.
29, and called 24 witnesses, while the defense rested after 2 days and 9 witnesses. Prosecutors used 4 women to testify against Maxwell, who had previously been convicted of sex trafficking.
She organized sexual massages and sometimes participated. The prosecution's attorneys presented a multi-part video series detailing Maxwell's case.
During the trial, 4 women testified that Maxwell had a sexual relationship with Epstein while they were teenagers. As part of the government's case, the prosecution presented flight logs as evidence.
The prosecution argued that Maxwell was necessary for the entire scheme, as her presence provided cover of respectability to Epstein's overtures to young girls. Expert testimony on child sexual assault described the grooming process used by predators to attract and exploit children.
The victim's vulnerability is rewarded through the trust gained from the predator. Prosecutors also argued that Ghislaine Maxwell's slaughter and sex trafficking convictions are overbroad and that her release is unjust.
They cited her discriminatory behavior. The judge denied the motions to suppress the charges, but sided with the prosecution's arguments that the court should consider a motion to dismiss one or more counts, and granted her bond.
Counts 3, 4, and 6 will be formally entered into judgment at Maxwell's sentencing on June 28. Sex trafficking conviction refused by judge.
A judge again upholds Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking sentence after a jury member admits to giving an incorrect answer on a jury questionnaire. The juror allegedly denied experiencing sexual abuse as a child, but the judge in this case says the juror's mistake was an honest one and wasn't an attempt to get on the jury.
The case ended 2 months ago, and the jury's decision is now under scrutiny. The case could be overturned and Maxwell may receive a new trial.
The jury also included a child who had been sexually abused, and one who later said that he lied to protect Maxwell. The jury, which consisted of 50 members, said it was not deliberate to fail to disclose the abuse.
Maxwell's attorneys say they will appeal the verdict. She could spend decades behind bars, and the sentencing hearing for Maxwell is scheduled for June.
Nathan declined to throw out the jury verdict, citing the failure of one juror to disclose prior sexual abuse. Maxwell is scheduled to be sentenced in late June on the 3 counts.
He also denied the defense's motion for a delay until after the release of a documentary about the case. The documentary will interview Maxwell, and victims of sexual abuse have long sought closure.
After a 3-week trial, the jury found Maxwell guilty of sex trafficking and helped abuse 4 teenage girls. The jury was questioned under oath by 4 women who were victims.
A judge has scheduled Maxwell's sentencing on June 28. He has since decided to retry her.
If the jury found her guilty, she could be sentenced as early as June 20. Sex trafficking conviction upheld by judge.
On Friday, a Manhattan judge again upheld Ghislaine Maxwell's sextortion conviction. Maxwell, who once counted Prince Andrew as an associate, was convicted of committing a crime in which a number of women were sexually abused.
Her case has garnered international attention since Epstein, a New York financier, committed suicide in his cell in February 2020 while awaiting trial. Maxwell's lawyers had requested a new trial in March, but Nathan denied them.
The defense was unable to convince the jury to toss Maxwell's sex trafficking conviction in February, despite her attorney's best efforts. A former federal prosecutor in the Northern District of Georgia and a former Department of Justice official testified that Maxwell knowingly abused a minor.
The jury found Maxwell guilty of 5 of 6 counts, while the prosecution had sought to throw out the convictions. A British socialite has appealed her retrial.
A judge has denied her request to throw out her sex trafficking conviction, saying the jury was properly instructed. While this is disappointing news, it remains to be seen how Maxwell will fare after being convicted in May.
The prosecution presented testimony from 4 women, including Epstein's former boyfriend, Matt. Several other female victims testified during the trial.
Prosecutors also asked the judge to define the word enticement and how much it meant to Maxwell. The prosecution argued that normalizing sexual massages was essential to the scheme.
The defense, led by Laura Menninger, said the prosecution's case is based on speculation and distracting photos of Maxwell with Epstein, including pictures of her giving him a foot massage. The defense also argued that the photos are insufficient evidence to convict Maxwell.